Hi everyone, and welcome to Couch Community. For those who are new here, Couch Community is a digital entertainment series produced by JT Production Management. It is a place to connect, interact, and be entertained with the outside world from the comfort of your own couch. In today's episode of Wellness for Your Wellbeing, we will be tackling the topic of change and its effect on our mental health. As a quick introduction, my name is Julia Trung and I am the Creative Director of JT Production Management. At Core, we are an events agency based in North Melbourne, and like many other businesses, our company has had to deal with some drastic changes over the last 3 months. And personally for me, I've had to find ways of coping with these changes and the pressure that comes with the uncertainty of business. And that is why within our team, we thought this would be a really interesting topic to bring to conversations at Couch Community. So with me today, I have 3 amazing presenters that I'd like to introduce to you. The very first person is Paul Larkin. Paul has spent the last 15 years working with teams and individuals to help them reach their goals. Paul's focus is on compassion, well-being, communication, motivation, and stress, which has allowed him to work in healthcare, education, and business teams to help every person do their very best. So welcome, Paul.
Hi, Julia. Thanks for having me.
After Paul, we also have Diana Nguyen, who is no stranger to Couch Community. Diana is a comedian, actor, writer, producer, guest speaker, MC, and LinkedIn video content creator with over 32,000 followers. Known for her LinkedIn series, #BeBrave and #JustDoingKaraoke, Diana works with businesses and individuals to build confidence and bring their inner child joy into presenting. Hi, Diana.
Bye.
And of course, lucky last, we have Michael Lim. Michael is a social enterprise manager at the Foundation for Young Australians. Michael's work focuses on putting young people at the centre of designing and developing solutions to complex social challenges related to education and employment in Melbourne's West. Hey, Michael.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I'm really excited to have everyone here today. Now, in today's discussion, we'll be tackling the topic of change and conflict. So first up, change. We are often not taught how to engage with change or given the skills to effectively adapt to the opportunities that change brings. Secondly, conflict. Of those changes can come conflict. So how do we engage effectively and healthily with conflict so that we can create something better? And I guess the answer to both those statements is through compassion. So compassion skills are what makes us human, and they can help us cope with change and conflict to produce better outcomes. But to give a better understanding, I'm really excited to actually let Paul explain to everyone that's watching what compassion is and how we can use it in conflict. So first things first, Paul, what is conflict and what's compassion got to do with it?
Great. So the way that I like to define conflict is anytime there's a gap between what we're experiencing right now and what we want to be experiencing. And because we all are different, we can experience those gaps really differently, which means that in a single conflict, we could all be experiencing it really differently because we want different things, we're different people. And when we feel that kind of pressure as those gaps open up, it's actually a really healthy sign that we're invested, that we care. If we didn't care, we wouldn't feel any real stress. And so that's the way that we can look at conflict. And what that does is it allows us to stop thinking that conflict's the problem and start thinking how we respond to it can be really positive, or maybe that can be a problem. So we have real choices for ourselves to make, which brings us to compassion. And compassion is a really healthy way of engaging with those gaps and that stress when we feel it as things are changing, as we're adapting. And the literal definition of the word compassion means to struggle with. So it's not just the same as empathy, where that's sort of feeling how someone else feels and putting ourselves in their shoes. This is about putting ourselves in other people's shoes or viewing ourselves in a really kind light, but then doing something about it in a really healthy way. And so compassion is really resting on the fact that I always believe that I'm okay, and I believe other people are okay, even when we're experiencing those conflicts. And it's actually based on skills. It's stuff that we can learn that we're going to probably talk about a little bit later on.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Paul. Obviously, we have Michael and Diana here with us today, both from different backgrounds in industry and life and everything like that. So I guess with what you've explained, Paul, maybe it's an opportunity for Diana and Michael to share how compassion skills has been applied in your own personal life. So maybe Diana, you want to start us off first?
I guess for me, because I'm an artist and I've been working in the industry for 15 years, and especially during COVID, I've been thinking about my work with Black Lives Matter that's happening right now. My history of my work that I have shown to share my story, and it has been about inclusion and exclusion, and somehow it always goes back to my mum, and I have to say she's one of the most compassionate women I've ever met, because she was given a second chance in life. So she came here in a boat. She had nothing at all, but then the compassion of a community accepting her, whether it be the Vietnamese community, so I grew up in Springvale, or whether it be, we're very lucky in Australia, we have welfare. So, all these tools have allowed my mother to raise her 3 daughters on her own. And for myself as an artist, but also as a human being, seeing what my mother has done to give back to the community, I've taken that on as a tool for me to give back. And especially with COVID-19, I feel like we're seeing humans come out, and especially with the protests that happened on Saturday last week, people didn't know what to do, but they just knew to be there. And I do want to say that not everyone needed to go to protest, but there were people in their bodies were saying, I need to stand somewhere. I need to show up. And for me, when I was standing in that crowd, that's when I saw humanity coming together. That's how I would speak about it. How about you, Michael?
Very similar. I think in how I use compassion and empathy in my job, we're all about putting young people with relevant lived experience of the issue at the center of designing and developing solutions to complex social issues. So when we talk about youth unemployment or educational inequality or youth access to mental health services, empathy is where we begin. Like, we really want to be in the shoes of the young person that we're ultimately designing for and we're working for and serving. And Paul had a really great concept of compassion and sort of empathy. One way I really like to think about it in my work is like empathy is compassion at rest, and then compassion is empathy in motion. So like we're applying compassion after we've really put the young person at the center, and then we're moving through sort of the design thinking process of how we can redesign these systems to better suit their needs. And I think with what you said, Diana, with things that are happening in the world, it kind of feels like the world is ending at the moment. But I think what is happening is that we don't have enough compassion or empathy in the systems that we have in the world. I think they're a legacy of like a bygone period, especially the education system. And if we were to use more empathy and use more compassion, we would have better systems that better support young people across their life. And for me, I was really hard on myself when COVID-19 hit. I took an approach where I had to be super productive. So I went on a bit of a shopping spree, as some people would know who are close to me. But I think what COVID-19 really did was revealed how much compassion and empathy we need. And in a time of physical distancing, I think everyone in the world started to realize how much they actually needed social connection. And then with that, obviously, social compassion.
Yeah, fantastic. Paul, did you have any particular thoughts on what Diana and Michael has just shared?
I loved all of that. I loved Michael's way of explaining, empathy being compassion at rest and compassion being empathy in action. And I think it's a great it's a great way of being able to ask ourselves, where we are in that kind of cycle. Are we feeling things out and engaging, or are we now acting on it? And with the protest, that's such a fantastic example of people feeling something and then thinking, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to act in a way that helps change things, and is not easy for people to make those decisions, but they're doing it because they care. So they're great examples of compassion, and great examples of learning it from the people that care about us and that we care about.
Yeah, fantastic. I definitely resonate with both Diana and Michael in terms of the basic, things such as the shopping spree. I think I definitely went into that phase pretty quickly as well when COVID hit, and I couldn't run any events as part of my company, and we were stuck at home. I went on an IKEA spree and I've refurnished a couple of rooms before realizing that I need to just, take a moment and just kind of understand what I'm going through and how am I coping with, I guess, the situation that it's, going through. And Diana, I really resonated with you just talking about your mum, because similarly, my mum shares a lot of that kind of compassion skills as well. And being socially distanced from her over the past, couple of months has been difficult, but at the same time, it really kind of shows how much we really need this in the world, and taking that moment to really understand it. So, and both of you guys have obviously touched on the topic of Black Lives Matters, which is really important. So given the activism that we are currently seeing around the world, a question for you, Paul, is do you think now is a key time to really engage and learn from compassion, given what is happening in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Michael was really accurate when he was talking about how these systems that exist are not able to be responsive to not just young people, but people who need something different, who the system wasn't designed for, or was designed specifically to exclude in a lot of cases. And it's something that we see. Compassion is a term that we all use, but it's also a term that's used quite specifically in a lot of research, and we look at how these things play out. And there's been a really sort of interesting learning we've had over the last few years, which is that this is where systems get stuck. They start to become successful for the people who designed them, and our tendency as humans is to protect that, and that's often by excluding other people instead of going back to that empathy and thinking, hey, like, how am I feeling about the system, or how are other people feeling about it? And I think in that way we can think about compassion being something that is always in motion. It's just about where in that cycle we are, which is a really important idea for those of us too who grew up and maybe didn't learn great compassion skills, or we learn other things from the people around us. We can always learn these skills and develop them. And that's something that we will also cover as we talk a little bit more.
Paul, in particular, I know when we spoke, a couple of weeks back, you talked about, this, I guess, activism is really an opportunity for us to be curious and doing a bit of research around it as a first step in really understanding the situation, and a first step leading into compassion skills. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So when we talk about compassion skills, there's really sort of three separate sets of skills that all combine to create really effective compassion. And it starts with empathy or with openness, like Michael was talking about and Diana was mentioning as well. And the reason why we start there is because as humans, we have emotional responses to things much faster than our brains can process it. That's just a function of biology. And so if we start somewhere else rather than what our emotions are, then we're not really working with good information. And so once we're figuring out how we're feeling about those things, then we can start to get curious about, hey, like, well, if that's how I feel and I want to feel differently, then what can I do about it? What do I need to know? And I think there's a lesson in there regarding a lot of the protests that we're seeing all around the world is people are telling us how they're feeling. And that's really valuable information. It's crucial. If we start other places and we talk to people about, well, why is it historically and all of those things, then we lose the context that right now, this is people's lived experience. And then once we know that, it starts to put all of the other information into context. And we can start to look at those things in a really open light. And so we started open and that emotional aspect. And what we have to remind ourselves and continue to really believe throughout that process is that we're okay, we're all worthwhile, even when we make mistakes, even when we're doing hard stuff. And that goes as much for ourselves as it does for the other people that we're engaging with, because as soon as we start to treat other people as if there's something inherently wrong with them, then we've set up this win-lose situation, and compassion doesn't work then. And same thing goes with this curiosity, is that we may not have all the answers, we may not know all the background, and we may not need to. But if we can be curious, then what we're really saying is, I believe I'm capable, even if I don't have the answers right now. But I also believe that you are all capable, even though you might have made mistakes or you don't have the answers. And I really liked that idea with Michael talking about putting young people at the centre of problems where they may not have all the answers, but they've got much more valuable information because they've got the problem, they experience it. So I'm sort of curious how you, Michael, sort of then work with those people to help them build that capability to start to influence things.
I think the first thing is sort of treating the lived experience as a form of expertise and trying as much as possible to elevate those voices and hand over as much power as possible. So that's the very practical side of things. I think with design and how you redesign systems, I mean, if you look at any system, there's sort of like three components to it. You've got the component itself. So if you look at a tree, for instance, you've got the branches, the leaves. Then you've got the interconnections. You've got the veins and the arteries running through the leaves and through the tree to deliver nutrients from the roots to the leaves. But then you've got the purpose, and the biological purpose of a tree is to inhale carbon dioxide, exhale oxygen. But if you change that purpose of a tree, you would change fundamentally what a tree does. So I think it's starting with what the purpose of this system is, and is it matching the needs of a young person in this case? And if they're not, then that purpose needs to change. I think what we're seeing with the Black Lives Matter rallies and other things happening in the world, especially with employment at this time, is that those institutions or those systems are lacking a lot of legitimacy at the moment, that their purpose is no longer serving what they're intending to do, and the effects that are having on the community is reducing the trust and legitimacy that young people see in it. So it's not just, police in this case, but it's everything. I think young people who have done the correct things, who have put themselves through education or put themselves through employment, to get employment, now facing a prospect where they no longer can get that. So the social contract that they've signed up to is no longer working for them. Through no fault of their own. And it's using that experience to say, okay, well, we need to redesign the purpose of this system to make sure that it suits the actual lived experience of this young person. Sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there.
No, it's good.
Pre-analogies are great for a lot of things.
I think it really resonates, and what it does is it shows the importance of that empathy and curiosity, and it's only at that point, once we have both of those things, that we can start to really work with, well, what's important here. And that's really the third set of skills within compassion, which is actually about accountability, because our emotional experience is really important. Our sort of curiosity and our capability building is really important. We also still have to be accountable for what are we going to do about that, or how are we going to hold other people accountable in a way that maintains their dignity. So we can have really tough conversations without devaluing other people or ourselves. And if we start with that accountability up front, I think that's when we see that's what these systems do. They say, no, you have to do this to be involved to get this. And they're starting with accountability rather than saying, hey, like, you're clearly experiencing something hard. How can we help?
Yeah, if I can put that into, especially with our Indigenous affairs that are happening in Australia right now, and I totally hear what you're saying, Paul and Michael, about the distrust in the system, which is because I learnt about the stolen generation when I was in high school. I was Other Justice Democracy, and I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't have the action to do it, but I knew something was wrong. I knew there was inequality. I knew, like in my head, I was like, how is it possible that you can take children away from their parents? And it was Tony Roach, not Tony, what's his name? Roach. He wrote a song, Took the Children Away. And that stuck with me. That song still sticks with me from high school. But I think what the injustice, and we're seeing in the word accountability, what I'm hearing from you is from what I hear from my friends in the community, which is, sure, you've said sorry, sure, you put billions of dollars into, helping regional communities and what's that called? Aboriginal communities out in Australia. However, they're not seeing it, and there is a distrust in wanting their help. So there's a disconnection already because there isn't a full accountability.
Yeah.
There isn't full acknowledgement of the pain. And I think that's really important, is that what we're seeing now and the activism that's happening now, it's saying, see our pain and anger. This is how we are feeling. This is how it feels for 200 years when you push us down. And, we see young people when they show up and they have that rebellious, they call it the rebellious, that's them showing up and saying, I'm going to try everything,
Yeah.
It's them going, hey, look at me, look at me. So I think that's what's happening now. It's going, look at our pain. And yeah, I think this discussion is really important, because how can we listen to this pain through compassionate ears instead of, oh, okay, thanks. Thank you for sharing. Let's keep going with our lives.
Yeah. I love how you've laid that out, because what you can see there is that this is when the government or people apologise, but they're not listening. And that's a crucial reminder that compassion isn't something that we do to people, it's something that we do with them. And so if we don't invite those people to say, like, hey, like, how are you feeling? Even though this might really be hard for me to listen to when you tell me what I've done to you for hundreds of years and how you feel about it, then until I know that, then you haven't told me. And that just means that you're going to resent it. You're going to resent me coming in and telling you what to do, because I haven't listened yet. And I haven't engaged with that empathy. And it's something that we can apply as much to ourselves as we do to other people. When we don't tell people healthily how we feel, we tend to carry that stuff around with us, and it's like a little day of resentment that we've got to lug around. And so being able to be brave enough to explain to people, hey, like, I'm feeling this way, without attacking other people or attacking ourselves. We're giving good information, we can be curious, and then we can say, like, I'm going to be accountable. I'm making a decision here to do something about that. And I do think with Aboriginal communities, I'm cautious. I'm from New Zealand, so I'm the least qualified person in the world to speak about it. I think that what the interactions I've had have been, people don't feel like they've been asked yet. They feel like they've been told a lot of things, but they haven't actually been asked what they want and what would be useful to them. And so that's a useful place to start.
Well, I think the best policy solutions come from, grassroots, bottom-up approaches, where top-down bureaucracies, I don't think, can achieve that level of compassion or level of empathy just by their design. And you can relate this to a lot of the systems that we have. The best parts of every system that we've got is almost the bottom-up approach. So if you look at our law system, the common law is just through precedents set from other cases. So it's all organic, it's grassroots. If you look at cities, like planned cities are boring to live in, where cities that develop organically are funner. Like Sydney, people want to live in Sydney and Melbourne and not Canberra for a reason. So I think the more decentralized, bottom-up, grassroots approach you can have towards the design and development of policy by incorporating lived experience, empathy, and compassion into all that, the more effective and contextually relevant the policy will be.
I think too, there's a tendency for especially for people who are analytical, who are planning these things, to want to understand everything, and then we can produce a plan. But that's not the same as being compassionate. We actually have to get out there and feel uncomfortable. If we're not engaging with other people and finding people who have got different experiences to us, then we're not really struggling, and we're definitely not struggling with anyone. We're just kind of agreeing.
Yeah.
Great. And I guess I've got a question for everyone that's here. How do you feel that your unconscious bias, I guess, being brought up based on our backgrounds and things like that, has an effect on our compassion skills?
That's a big question. How long have we got?
Jesus.
So,
I probably, I mean, I'll make a quick comment. As a Vietnamese, Chinese, Australian-born girl, my parents are similar to Diana's, immigrated to Australia and whatnot. In many ways, as much as my mum is compassionate within our own family, it's also this weird thing of being brought up in this society where I feel like sometimes I can't show my feelings, or I can't always be compassionate, because you are meant to be grateful for the opportunity of living and growing up in Australia. You're meant to be grateful of the education system, everything that you've been given being in Australia, and therefore you're meant to kind of hold back some of those emotions, some of those feelings, and that you're not meant to show your feelings in a way. You're just meant to kind of head down, bum up, study, get to uni, go through uni, work, and then give back to society where you can, and you just keep pushing through. So I guess that's kind of my bias upbringing in a way that I can share. But how about you, Diana and Michael? What are your thoughts around that?
All right, I'll go first. I was just staring at Diana. So in terms of, I think very similar to your story, Julia, is having sort of that immigrant experience. My parents and even myself when I was younger tended to view problems or issues that we had on a hierarchy. So, if you take care of the basic needs, everything else isn't an issue. So long you've got a roof, clean air, clean water, you shouldn't have anything to complain about. But I think, viewing it as a hierarchy, I don't know, it lacks a lot of room to grow. So in the sense that, if, like, my mom always used to say, you shouldn't feel sad because there are worse people out there, worse off than you. But at the same time, it's, you shouldn't also feel happy because there are happier people out there than you. It's the same sort of logic. So I've come to sort of try and really combat that unconscious bias. Welcome back, Paul. You missed my knowledge drop there. I'll catch you up later. I'll catch you up later on that. But so that's been my experiences. So I think I've come to sort of try and unlearn that and try to view problems in the context of when they occur, and not so much in comparison or in relation to a hierarchy.
Both of you guys raised something with me, which is I grew up in a very tough home, and if you've seen my web series, you would see the tough love. It was no story time. There was no hugs and kisses in bed. There was no kiss drop off at school. The traditional white family culture. I think because their mentality was all about future, and it wasn't about present and growth here. It was like, how do we build an empire when we've come here with nothing? That was them,
Yeah.
How do we get to the A to Z? Let's not think about A to B. A to B is not important. And I think that's what, Michael, I totally agree. I've had to unlearn all of that because I've kind of been surviving, survivor mode, when we've been passed on that mentality from my parents: survive. But by unlearning it, we become present. And I think that's really important when we talk about biases and racism and discrimination. It is being present and now in the moment, like we are now, to talk about it instead of trying to clean it up.
Yeah.
And so those were the things that were activated when you guys spoke about that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'd be really curious to know, unless Paul, you've got any comments you wanted to make, but I both of you guys have talked about the ability to unlearn it over time. And I guess, I've managed to be in contact with lots of other young people or other people with similar backgrounds to me, and they are still in that kind of mindset, the A to Z mindset, which I agree so much. So what would be some of your tips, to how do we unlearn it? How do we...
Still going. Still going, dude.
I mean, today's not the solution for everything, but let's share some tips.
For sure. One thing that I do want to mention is I think one thing that is really relevant to a lot of our parents or friends or people we care about, how they deal with things, is that when you've come from a really horrendous situation, there's often trauma that changes the way that we view things. It changes the way we respond to things. And as much as our parents might absolutely love us and be prepared to do anything for us, that doesn't mean that they've always had the right skills, because they just weren't lucky enough. They didn't live in a time or a place where they were able to develop those, because they had bigger things to worry about. My father came from Northern Ireland. He had brothers killed by the army, so I saw a lot of that in him, and a real tendency to kind of go to that fight or flight rather than kind of engage with things compassionately, because you didn't have time. If someone's shooting at you, you just get out of there. And he was lucky enough to look like every other New Zealander when he got to New Zealand. So he didn't have to deal with many of the things that occur in other countries or for different people. So I think understanding that what is important to us and where we're trying to go can be separated out from how we do it. So thinking, hey, I want to get here, I want to be independent, or I want to help my family be independent or achieve these things. Then the next question is really, but how do I want to go about that? Do I want to go about that at all costs, or do I want to go about it compassionately and in a way that engages people in a way that's really healthy for me and for them? Because one day we're going to be those parents, and we have an opportunity to have those skills. The other thing is that I keep using this word skills. It's a lot like picking up a new sport or a new language or learning a new subject at school. It feels really bad the first time you do it. Unless you're pretty lucky, when you start learning new skills, you're going to feel a bit strange. You're going to feel pretty uncomfortable. And then suddenly you look back and think, hey, like this thing that used to be really hard for me now is starting to become second nature, and I've stopped doing all the old behaviors that I didn't want, and I'm getting better at these new ones. And so what I would encourage people to do is rather than worrying about when you're perfect, when you're that kind of A+ compassion person, then you start using it, just start. And what you'll find is you will get better. The more research we do, we don't get better, we just know more. And probably the simplest thing that I ever learned working with one of the compassion researchers I've done a lot of work with, and he said to me, this will not make your life easier, but it will make it more meaningful, it'll make it more effective. And it all rests on the fact that I'm okay and you're okay, even when things are hard, even when we make mistakes. And so when we're in those interactions with our parents or with other people, thinking, hey, well, I'm okay and you're okay, but that doesn't mean that we're not responsible for our behavior. We can now do something about that. And so that's probably a real simple tip that goes right back to how we view things. And if we can keep that in mind and then start with empathy, start with telling people how we feel or inviting them to tell us how they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and then go on to that being curious and then being accountable, thinking, okay, so what's really important here and what's not important? What can we get rid of? What we keep telling ourselves there's 10 different reasons why you can't do this thing, why we can't give people different rights. Which ones of those are really important? And we're not going to get it right every time. I think the COVID response has been really interesting around the world, watching some governments just double down, think, no, we're not going to do this. and then watch others. I'm biased, seeing as we're talking about bias. I look at Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, and I just see this totally compassionate response, and it's been amazing. It's been engaging people, saying like, we know this is hard, and we've got your back.
Fantastic. Diana or Michael, any particular comments or anything you wanted to add from your own experience to what Paul's suggesting?
You're first this time, Diana.
We're so polite. Yeah.
I'm still processing, and I was actually reading the Facebook Live. So if you're watching, thank you for being part of the conversation. A really good quote someone said was, "Whoa, can you guys please do an episode of Q&A?" Bam, love it.
All right, we've got part 2.
I'm free on Monday.
Before I touched on about, because I don't have children, and I would like to have children, and I know that there is generational trauma that's been passed on from the war, but also, Vietnam's. Michael, what's your cultural background?
Chinese Singaporean. So I was born in Singapore.
Right. So Julia and I, Vietnamese, downtown. So we've gained this kind of story and narrative of the boat journey or the migration struggle here. And I think one thing that I would like to do to break that toughness that I had growing up, or that like very perceived future, is to sit with my children when issues like this arise in the world. And I think with COVID, a lot of parents have had to explain to their children, why are we locked in the house for 2 months? Like, I think it really opened the door for conversation, because you couldn't just say, oh, you can't go outside, it's raining, you can't go outside because your friend. Like, you cannot go outside for 2 months because there is a virus that might make you sick. And I think exactly when Paul started before the conversation, we're seeing a shift, which in this pandemic, things are more alert or we're in activism mode right now, because we realize we have power on our phones. We realize we can show compassion and care on our phones now. We don't need to stand on a podium. So yeah, that's where I am at, my brain about it. Michael, to you.
As we talk about unlearning, relearning, sort of things that we've picked up from childhood, I actually started this book today, which you'll all love. It didn't start with you. So how inherited family trauma shapes who we are and how to end that cycle. So one way I've started to unlearn is really to just expose myself to a lot of different information and sort of what's out there. And I think it's something, picking up on what Paul said before, it's really understanding, what's my path to action? Like when I feel an emotion, it's really interrogating, where is that emotion coming from? And what action will come out of that emotion? And sort of just breaking those two things apart, that I can have an emotion and that's okay. But what I can change is my interpretation and then my subsequent action towards that emotion. And really interrogating both, separating that out. I think in terms of what you're picking up on what Diana said before, my mind's also going everywhere. Talking about like COVID-19 and Corona, I think for the first time in maybe 100 years or in human history, we finally have something where everyone has the same shared goal.
Yes.
Like no matter where you are in the world, you've got the shared goal of stopping this.
Yes.
And we've seen obviously the positive impacts it's had on the environment and sort of other things as well, and possibly relationships at the same time. But I think it really comes back to what is our shared goal and how can we have compassion for how we approach it. Because I think one of the questions that Julia might ask now, but I'm going to answer it now anyway, is I think one of the questions was looking at where's it gone? People perceiving problems differently. I don't think people perceive problems differently. I think they see the same problem, but they perceive a solution differently, and they're arguing about the solution, but they actually agree on the same problem. And you've seen countries do radically different things with their problem of Corona, but everyone has the same goal. They just have employed different solutions. I'm not here to say that New Zealand is better than the US or whatever it might be, even though they are. It's really around, we have the same problem, but it's a different solution, I really believe.
Yeah.
That is the issue.
And I think with the coronavirus, COVID-19, and that's what you said, Michael, the end goal is to survive it, and it didn't discriminate based on colour.
No.
It was a human experience, like a human activity that could get anyone. It didn't matter what class you were.
No.
Unless you're on a cruise ship, that's a class level cruise ship. But we saw that it did not discriminate, and it really banded people together. However, in saying that, the Asian community did get battered with racism because of the origin of it. So, it's also now thinking about it, we did get slammed for it as well. And I'm not Chinese, and I was offended by that you could just group a whole class of people or direct racism because of an origin of where this disease came from.
Yeah, definitely.
And just tacking on the end of what Diana you were saying, it's also, I feel like people were finding an opportunity to just put blame and put reasons as to why all of this is happening on someone or something, and it happens to be that the origin was much easier to group and just to say, it's your fault. That's why you guys are the core of the problem. And I guess that in many ways, the people who are acting out with these kind of racism and these thoughts are handling conflict without compassion in a different way, isn't it? Now, we actually have a question from our audience. So Michelle has asked, how would you encourage young people to engage in today's world to ensure they are learning the critical skills to be employable? It's a really great question. Who wants to take a stab at it?
I see another question there similarly about teaching compassion in the education system or curriculum, and I think they're intertwined. I'm lucky enough to do a bit of work with some schools teaching teachers and staff there to be able to have compassion skills to deal with. They're at a school for kids who are experiencing difficulties, and if people are starting to really develop these skills and this mindset that I'm okay even though there's this trauma background, or I don't have the opportunities that I would like, or I don't have all the answers yet, I'm not perfect, then they're starting to give themselves permission to learn in a really healthy way. And one thing that a lot of employers will tell you is that they're not hiring for technical skills. They're hiring for, is this person someone who is going to be a really healthy addition to this team? And I think that technical skills are really important. I'm not going to tell anyone that you don't have to have those things. But if we can't communicate with people healthily, and if we can't learn well, then employers don't really mind. They don't care about our technical skills. That's sort of been my experience, but I'm speaking from a position of not having to deal with any particular biases or anything like that applied to me. So it's something where I'd love to hear other people's perspective.
Michael, do you want to add to that, especially, I guess, with your day-to-day dealings with young people in Melbourne's West as well?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what Paul said in terms of the lack of the decreasing emphasis on technical skills and sort of the increasing importance of that social emotional intelligence and those enterprise skills. But I think practically, in terms of process and how we let young people learn and to be employable for the future is really just to get out of their way. And again, I go back to having these top-down bureaucratic systems, and the education system fundamentally was created to be a pipeline for children to go straight into factories. I mean, that's why we have bells, we have set timetables, because it operates like a factory. And what we've, with the internet and the leverage of the internet that young people have today, they can learn anything they want on YouTube, Skillshare, Udemy. So I think I have a perspective where if we really just let children or young people learn the skills that they want to learn, they will learn it. I mean, kids are naturally very curious animals. I mean, how many questions does a 4-year-old ask their parents about everything in life? They're just naturally curious. And there's been pilots in, the slums of India, for instance, where it's called the One Tablet, One Child initiative, I think. I could be getting that wrong, where they basically just gave a group of children one iPad, left them with no other instructions, and came back a month later. And by then, the kids had formed their own economy of education. They had broken into the iPad. They could get all the apps they wanted. And the older kids were now teaching the younger kids. So, I mean, there is no sort of top-down solution there, just grassroots, bottom-up innovation by children who want to learn. So I really think we just need to get out of their way in the 21st century.
And I would add maybe one or two more things would be diversify your groups and circles, engage in more stories that are not similar to yours. I think it's very important. And like Michael said, you got to put yourself in their shoes to have empathy that will lead to compassion. And also a tip for any young person is to travel. Get out of Australia. Go see the world. Go see the world, how they operate. And you'll come back changed, like guaranteed. So those will be my two tips to any young person out there. Finish school, just go. Get bankrupt and go. Just leave, save all your money and get out of here, because the world will teach you more than it teaches you in the backyard.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
I think to Michael's point really quickly as well, one of the best ways that any of us can teach young people these skills is by not teaching them, but actually just modeling them, just doing it. If we show people that we're compassionate, kids learn. That's how they learn, by observing other people and seeing what works and what gets rewarded. And so the best teaching we can do is just by modeling it, by being an example.
Yeah, fantastic.
We solved it.
Okay, that was really fascinating. I'm just checking to see if we've got any other questions. There's obviously a few questions around how do we build these skills. We've touched on talking about specifically for young people, for children, but as adults, we spoke earlier about how do we unlearn our, biased stories to learn these kind of skills. But Paul, if you could summarize for everyone watching and all of us, what are, your 3 top tips in how can we learn these skills as adults? Great
question. So I've avoided talking about too much research because it's dry and boring, but I think it's important to be able to show that the stuff's real. And there's been a lot of research done, particularly in healthcare and medicine with compassion, where they found that 38 seconds is all it takes for a compassionate interaction with a patient for them to be significantly better off long term, not just in the short term. So for anaesthetists, they can see that having an anaesthetist who talks to you and says, "Hey, I care about you. Is there anything you want me to know?" actually reduces the amount of drugs they need to give you, because you are less stressed, you feel less pain. And so the question that comes out of that in healthcare is, well, can we train it? Because if it's better, then we want to train it. And there's been loads of research showing that, yes, you can absolutely train compassion. The only thing that you need to do is want to learn it, just like anything. And so even those of us who naturally might think, I'm not a particularly emotional person. It feels hard for me. I don't like to disclose my emotions, or maybe I kind of don't really know what they are all the time. We can practice these things. So there's a lot of really great resources. One of them is the workbook that's in the Facebook group there. That's free for people who are here now to be able to access. And there are other ones out there that we can share through the group. And just by finding resources that you feel comfortable starting to use, skill-based stuff rather than understanding. Don't go bothering to do a whole lot of research, because you can spend years researching and you still haven't tried a single skill. That's a pretty common trap. And really from there, just looking around. Some people find these skills in sports teams. Some people find them in their friends and their families. Some people find them within their religion. I think it's just a question of thinking, hey, where do I where do I find things that I can use and adapt and generalize to the rest of my world that work for me healthily. Anytime someone tells you they've got the one answer, be skeptical, because there's no one answer. That's why I don't want to give you a single answer.
Okay, fine. And Diana or Michael, would you like to add anything? Any final comments?
I think I would add on top of what Paul's already said. I think we've talked about this, Julie, really, actively investing in developing your listening and your communication skills. I think if you break down the source of compassion skills, I think they're one of the fundamental components of it. So really, really actively listening to a person, communicating how you're feeling, or articulating the thoughts or emotions that you're seeing in them, I think is really fundamental to compassion, and also just asking better questions of yourself and of others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fantastic. And that's so true. We did talk about this actually recently too, Michael, particularly just being able to try to apply it in simple day-to-day things in our work, like giving feedback to a colleague or giving feedback to someone, or even taking feedback on, and just having that extra layer of understanding and compassion skills really makes that particular job so much easier to, I guess, manage and handle. So thanks for that, Michael. Diana, anything else from you?
Yeah, it's been interesting though, because we've been talking about compassion to others, but I've been learning recently about compassion to myself, which is meditating, being kind, and like you just said, Julia, it's like bringing it back to you, who you are, and being with yourself to listen. That's how compassion works. You have to be in it to hear it. And I didn't know about the 38 seconds. I thought that's really interesting, because if every person in the world gave 38 seconds a day to someone and to themselves, oh my God, the world would change.
It would. Yep. Solve it again. I think one thing with all of this is that there's no one out there who's compassionate all the time. We all have moments where we beat ourselves up, or we beat other people up, where we are not compassionate, and that's okay. It's totally human nature. So just understanding that it's not about being perfect. We never, with any new skill or with trying anything new, when we really care about stuff, we're going to go off the rails sometimes. And I think the sooner that we realize that, and we make a decision to get back to being compassionate, and we extend that same kind of choice to other people, and think, you know what, the only behavior that we're responsible for is our own. And so when someone else is battling, when they're not behaving compassionately, they're still accountable for that, but we don't have to attack them. We can engage with them compassionately even then, and that's how you see some of these protests have worked really well at the moment, where people have suddenly learned a whole different skill set from a protester who refuses to get in a fight with them. Those sorts of things are, we can always learn that.
Yeah, fantastic. Now we've actually got another question from the audience. So Michelle has asked, what advice would you give to those who want to help decelerate the racist narrative brought about unconsciously by COVID-19?
I'm happy to have a very small crack at that. I've been using compassion for some of those conversations with people, and just that starting it open by disclosing how I feel about that. And I just say, look, I'm really sad to hear that. I'm angry to hear that, and I want to explain to you why. And I ask questions. I say, I'm curious, like what has led you to believe that? And I always finish by saying, like, that type of racism, it's not acceptable to me. And so I'm not at any point saying, like, you're an idiot, you've got to go away. I'm just saying this is not acceptable, but I'm curious to know if you can rationalize it. And you'll often hear people suddenly think, oh, yeah, no, you're right. Not all the time. People will double down, but I think it needs calling out in a really compassionate way the moment it happens, not later on.
Yeah. Diana, did you have any particular thoughts?
Well, racism towards the Asian community in Australia has been evident since the gold rush times, like when they first arrived here. So, every generation has faced it. I guess, as I said before, you can only practice compassion when you know someone you are a part of. When you listen to someone's story and give an opportunity for them to be heard, then will that seep into you for you to go, oh, that's pain. That's not a nice feeling. And especially with social media, it's really easy to point. And I think, we've been talking about Trump. He's been very good at being the finger pointer and making it very divisive for people to also join the way he speaks. But then I think about Pauline Hanson and how she affected my whole teenage years and whole identity of who I am. It's a continuing. From what I'm hearing from Paul, is continuing need to call it out as it happens. And I had these bunch of guys at a comedy night that I was hosting. They saw me and then they said, "Hey, give us a Corona joke." And that I went, I don't need this right now. I couldn't call it out. I said, "Thank you very much. I got to do a show." So there are points in that this is happening in our regular life. Like, I guess for us, like when can we stop? When can we stop this?
Yeah. That's Michael.
It's a big question, and I think the approach, sort of that Paul outlined, of one where it's not so confrontational, adversarial, if it's safe to do so, by really interrogating their own thinking and their own, their own path to action and how they might have feelings of fear, or whatever it might be, and how that leads them to have these thoughts or these feelings. So really just interrogating that and changing that at the root cause, I think, is the best way to do it, and also create new narratives.
I think one thing I'd add that's pretty relevant to social media, especially with the rise of this kind of troll-based stuff that you see Hanson and Trump and other people wheel out, they are specifically and deliberately, and it's not accidental, trying to create situations where people struggle against each other. It's the opposite of compassion. It's like, and what they are trying to do is to distract from the real issues, and deal at a really sort of surface level. And if we're engaging compassionately, that doesn't mean that we have to keep engaging compassionately. We can walk away, or we can call it out and leave it. If you see some of those people, the more bandwidth they get, the more people are trying to engage with them, and you can see that they've made a decision to not be constructive. They actually don't want to talk about how they're feeling. They just want to make it worse. One of the analogies someone used a long time ago is that if you keep engaging with those people, if you keep doing that, then all you're doing is training arsonists. You just go around trying to put out all their fires, and you never will. You're just making them really good at arguing.
Yeah.
So just give them the oxygen that they want. It's really hard not to. It's really hard not to. I'm not the butt of it. I'm not on the wrong end of it. I'm just someone who's often trying to call it out.
Well, maybe we could practice with you, Paul.
Sure. Yep.
That's another episode.
Episode two.
Role play.
Yep. Yeah. Diana and Michael try and make Paul cry.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. No. Thank you for that. I think we've somewhat tried to answer Michelle's question. I also just wanted to add that sometimes it's you guys have mentioned calling it out, but also internally as well. Sometimes you don't intend on being racist, and I don't mean just relating to COVID-19. I mean day-to-day things that's happening in life. It's whether you might want to just take a moment just to think about it and ask those questions that Paul have mentioned, and actually think about it and step it out in your mind. Is that going to cause pain if you say that, if you do that, or if you act on that? And then you might actually be calling yourself out, and you know, being able to learn a compassion skill along the way. So I think it's time to wrap up. I think we're spot on an hour. So that's pretty good. Paul, Michael, Diana, thank you so much. Before we let you go, did anyone want to have any final words? Anything else you wanted to say before we wrapped up? We might need to do an episode 2 of this.
I think so. There was a great question there where I think it was directed at Diana and I, where when have you struggled to use compassion skills? So I'm glad I don't have to answer that in this episode. Next time.
Fantastic.
I'd just like to thank everyone. It's been really great. And if anyone out there has got any questions or thoughts, then please, by all means, like email me. Go through the Facebook page. The workbook there's got some really great material looking at this stuff. And if you think, hey, this is something that I want to know more about, then I'd love to hear it, because it's something that I think you know, we can all do with more of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Thank you so much, Paul, Diana, and Michael. Thank you once again. Thanks everyone for joining us online and commenting and everything as well. It's been a lot of fun having you with us. If you're interested in more Couch community events, please check out our website. Our next event is actually this Friday, where we're doing a crossover between 2 series. So the wellness series, as well as People of Couch Community, where I'll be chatting and doing my makeup similar to what Diana did last week.
It was so good. It was so good.
You looked amazing at the end of it. So I'll be chatting to Peter Guy from Iridis Cosmetics, learning more about how she actually entered the cosmetic industry. So that's happening on Friday, 19th of June at 12 p.m. But other than that, thank you once again, and have a lovely day, everyone.
Thank you.
See ya.